Well, as you guys can see, I'm not at school today, and for what a ridiculous reason. Pink eye, which doesn't hurt, doesn't bug me, but is highly contagious to you. So I'm staying home and instead setting up some videos for you guys to enjoy in class with your fine substitute teacher. But first, a little introduction. Before I talk about today's lesson, let's get a couple procedural things out of the way. A number of you emailed last night and said that you were unable to access your school files from home using the remote access. I couldn't do it either. I had some other teachers tried, no luck. So here's the deal. Bringing it on Monday, what I would do today before the end of class is to email your PowerPoints as they exist now home so you can work on them at home. I don't know if the remote access will be up and running, so that's due on Monday. You'll also have homework that's on the website now and on the calendar now that will be due on Monday as well. The title of the assignment is Where is Uncle Sam? It's on the assignments page of the website as I record this right now, ready for you to enjoy. Today in class, after I give you a little bit of background, you'll watch a video about the Spanish-American War and complete some video notes based on the information you learn from that piece. So let's get started with today's lesson. So I want you guys to think about America in the last decade of the 19th century. So into the 1890s, Native American culture has been essentially suppressed in the American West. The U.S. government Census Bureau has declared that the American frontier is closed. It is no longer considered to be a frontier. It has been explored. There's sufficient settlement now that it has lost its frontier status. In 1893, there's an economic depression in the United States. Not as strong perhaps as what would follow in the early 20th century, but still of concern to those business leaders in America as well as to the government itself. Plus, it's worth noting that America has become a sufficient industrial power that the country is now producing a surplus of both economic, manufactured, and agricultural goods. And at this point, there is concern of the potential for providing a market for these excess goods so that America can continue to grow as an economic power. Really, remember, what we're looking at now is a new type of manifest destiny. This is not the manifest destiny merely that encouraged European settlers, white Americans, to settle the American frontier, that stated it was a God-given right to do so. This is now a manifest destiny that will expand beyond America's borders and look internationally for economic markets. One thing to look at is America's history in the 1800s of using its military to coerce other nations into giving America access to certain resources or to bluntly take over nations or parts of countries. So I want you to think about this brief list of America's actions pre-1890s. In 1852 and 1853 in Argentina, Marines are landed and maintain a base in Buenos Aires to protect American interests during a revolution. In 1853 in Nicaragua, there's military action to protect American lives and interests during political disturbances. In 1853 and 1854 in Japan, Admiral Perry leads a large flotilla of naval ships to Japan to show the flag and also to demonstrate American military support. Nicaragua again in 1854, Uruguay 1855, 1859, China military action to protect American interests in Shanghai, 1860 in Angola and Portuguese West Africa, protecting American lives when quote-unquote the natives become troublesome. 1893 Hawaii, ostensibly to protect American lives and property, actually to promote a provisional government under Sanford B. Dole. This action was disavowed by the United States. We'll talk more about that later. And 1894, Nicaragua to protect American interests following a revolution Now, the document I'm quoting from is a U.S. State Department document written in, what's the date, 1962, to support American efforts in Cuba in the 60s, and referencing America's historical activity in the 1800s. Another thing to be aware of, Alfred Mahan, M-A-H-A-N, is a U.S. Navy captain who has significant influence in Washington and has convinced the powers that be that a strong Navy will give America strong power worldwide, international power. So America is busily building a strong Navy to allow the nation to spread its influence worldwide. Consider this quote, going back to the economic angle, from Senator Henry Cabot Lodge of Massachusetts, written during the time, and I quote, "In the interest of our commerce, we should build the Nicaragua Canal, and for the protection of that canal and for the sake of our commercial supremacy in the Pacific, we should control the Hawaiian Islands and maintain our influence in Samoa. And when the Nicaraguan Canal is built, the island of Cuba will become a necessity. The great nations are rapidly absorbing for their future expansion and their present defense all the waste places of the earth. It is a movement which makes for civilization and the advancement of the race. As one of the great nations of the world, the United States must not fall out of the line of march." And what Lodge was referring to was the march of colonization, the march of imperialism. One thing I want you guys to do as we talk more about U.S. imperialism is to consider how Americans viewed people who lived in Cuba, the Philippines, or perhaps the Spanish colonizers themselves. Think about how people who lived in Hawaii were portrayed. Take a look at this series of cartoons that were popular during the period and consider how these images might have affected the average American's opinion about not only the residents of these nations, but also how worthy they were as citizens relative to Americans. Because what you'll see here is that the point that the cartoonists were trying to make, and that the American government wanted to make to its public, was that we could go in and save these countries. That they could not do it themselves. They needed to be civilized. They needed to be modernized. So look at the images that you see in these cartoons and consider how it would affect your opinion back then. So consider how President McKinley described to a group of visiting ministers how he decided to invade the Philippines. And I quote, "Before you go, I would like to just say a word about the Philippine business. The truth is, I didn't want the Philippines, and when they came to us as a gift from the gods, I did not know what to do with them. I sought counsel from all sides, Democrats as well as Republicans. I thought first we should only take Manila, then Luzon, then other islands perhaps also. I walked the floor of the White House night after night until midnight, and I am not ashamed to tell you, gentlemen, that I went down on my knees and prayed Almighty God for light and guidance more than one night. And one night it came to me this way. I don't know how it was, but it came. Number one, that we should not give them back to Spain. That would be cowardly and dishonorable. Number two, that we could not return them over to France or Germany, our commercial rivals in the Orient. That would be bad business and discreditable. Number three, that we could not leave them to themselves. They were unfit for self-government, and that they would soon have anarchy and misrule over there worse than Spain's was. And number four, that there was nothing left for us to do but to take them all and to educate the Filipinos, uplift and civilize and Christianize them, and by God's grace do the very best we could by them as our fellow men for whom Christ also died. And then I went to bed and went to sleep and slept soundly." So that is how the president at the time made his decision, or at least described it, related to invading the Philippines. Think about what he emphasized. We couldn't give it to our economic rivals. We could not trust Filipinos to govern themselves. Again, we've got some social Darwinism. They're not fit as a culture to govern themselves. And that the best bet was for Americans to come in, uplift and civilize them. The assumption was that they were not, and also to convert them to Christianity. Having made those decisions, McKinley was able to go to bed and sleep soundly, comfortable with his decision.